we are group number 1. Where we'll be talking about the Mueller report. So the Mueller report is a documentation of the findings from Robert Mueller about investigations of Russian efforts to interfere in the 2016 U.S. election. In this speech, we'll be discussing the history of the Mueller report, how it started, important definitions you need to know about the Mueller report, and a summary of the first and second section of the Mueller report. And to talk about the history will be
the Mueller report started because of suspicions between Trump and Russia's possible collusion in the 2016 presidential election. And for those who don't know what collusion is, it's a secret and illegal cooperation or conspiracy made in order to cheat or deceive other people. U.S. intelligence agencies claimed that Russia tipped the votes in order to favor Trump. U.S. intelligence agencies are part of the intelligence community, and this community is made up of 17 other agencies that work together to support foreign policy and national security. Intelligence agencies specifically are responsible for collecting, analyzing, and exploiting information in order to support law enforcement, military, foreign policy, and national security objectives. They claimed that Russia conducted cyber attacks and planted fake news in the media in order to tip the votes. And ways that they could have figured this out is through spying, communication interception, cryptanalysis, which is analyzing for hidden messages and systems, cooperating with other institutions, and evaluating public sources. Robert Mueller was chosen to oversee this investigation, and he was seen as the perfect candidate, as he was a decorated Marine officer from the Marine Corps, a district attorney, and an FBI director. At the end of this investigation, he ended up becoming the second longest serving FBI director in history. Throughout this investigation, Trump and Russian officials denied any connection to the election, and Trump called this the greatest political witch hunt in history. Through the years, Robert Mueller turned in his reports to Attorney General William Barr, and as he was reviewing his last document or his final draft, he decided to redact information that he thought could be harmful or inappropriate to people that were not originally charged. He also decided to redact classified information, grand jury items, and closed-door testimonies. The 2-year investigation that started in May 2017 ended this year in March, and the 14th of that month was when the House of Representatives voted 420-0 to release the redacted document to the people in order to show their transparency. Next, we have Andrew with some definitions.
Alright, so some of the definitions that I will be, or some of the things that I will be defining are conspiracy, obstruction of justice, executive privilege, presidential clear statement rules, presidential indictment rules, and OLC ruling. These definitions will later on be used to help better understand our speech. So conspiracy, the legal definition is an agreement between 2 or more people to commit an illegal act along with an intent to achieve that agreement's goal. Obstruction of justice is an act that corruptly or by threat or force or any threatening letter or communication influences, obstructs or impedes or endeavors to influence, obstruct or impede the due administration of justice, which basically means any attempt, successful or not, to hide the truth can be considered an obstruction of justice. So there are 3 elements when determining an obstruction of justice. Firstly, there is the obstructive act, which is when you make things harder for those conducting an official investigation. Some examples would be bribing officials like higher-ups or lying. The second element is nexus, which is the connection or relevance to the official proceedings. And the last element to determine obstruction of justice is the corrupt intent. Next, we have executive privilege, which is the power a president has to withhold information from the public. So basically, if the government found aliens, the president could say, we don't want the public to know about this. The presidential clear statement rule is the legal guideline specifying that a statute cannot be applied to the president if it does not specifically pertain to the president. And the only exception to that is when there's a bribery case. The presidential indictment rules state that a sitting president cannot be indicted unless they have been impeached. And the OLC rulings is basically, it refers to the presidential clear statement rules and the presidential indictment rules. OLC stands for Office of Legal Counsel. And next we have Kate to summarize section 1 of the Mueller report.
So, in section 1, it basically summarized how the Russian government interfered with the 2016 presidential election. It was announced that Russian hackers hacked into Hillary Clinton's computer and released many private emails. The Russian intelligence called GRU hacked materials that damaged Clinton's campaign. There were thousands of Clinton's emails and networks released and stolen and provided to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is basically a website that leaks news and So, Trump and his team were also in constant contact with the Russian government. For example, George Papadopoulos, who is one of the chairmen in Trump's administration, was caught meeting with Joseph Misfud. Joseph Misfud is a London-based professor who has a lot of connections to Russia, and he was the one who informed George Papadopoulos that Russia had dirt on Hillary Clinton. The dirt that was on Hillary Clinton was basically that John Podesta, who was also Clinton's chairman, was basically talking negatively about Bernie Sanders and also talking negatively about Hillary Clinton, which is negative on Hillary Clinton because how are the people who are supposed to support her talking negatively about her? Also, Paul Manafort, who is also part of Trump's administration, was caught meeting with Konstantin Kilimnik, who is a political consultant for Russia, and he has FBI ties to Russian intelligence. And they were basically also caught talking about how Russia can help Trump in his winning of the election. It is said that there was no special counsel's charging decision because there was not enough evidence that could charge anyone. And next we have Peter talking about section 2.
All right, so the second half of the report focuses on whether or not Trump committed obstruction of justice in his interactions with the special counsel and other individuals related to the investigation of the special counsel. Mueller separates the second half of his report into 3 different sections, the first of which covers specific legal rules that he has to abide by over the course of his investigation. The second of which covers all of the various points at which potential obstruction of justice might have occurred and summarizes his investigations into those things. And the third of which covers general conclusions that he draws and the overall case and conditions that it falls under. When he clarifies his the rules that he has to follow, the first is he mentions that indictment rule that Andrew mentioned, that the president cannot be indicted while sitting president except under the case of an impeachment proceeding. He also outlines the limits of that point in that he describes that while this means that he cannot come to any conclusion that the president is guilty for a number of reasons, he can come to the conclusion that the president is innocent, and that his conclusions while they cannot be used to indict the president while he is the president, could be used to indict the president after the fact, once the president is no longer the president. The rest of section 2 covers potential acts of obstruction of justice. It looks at 10 different instances, which I will then be summarizing for you. The first of which is, back one. There you go. The first of which is his treatment of Michael Flynn and his attempts to convince investigators who are going to investigate Flynn to give him a light investigation or no investigation. The second is pressuring officials to announce that the president was not being investigated when that was not the case. The third is his firing of his FBI director, James Comey. The fourth is his efforts to remove Mueller as a special counsel and replace Mueller with someone handpicked by his then Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. Fifth, his attempts to get Attorney Jeff Sessions to limit the scope of the special counsel investigations from past elections and future elections to only future elections, so it would not investigate the 2016 elections. Sixth, his efforts to prevent disclosures of the Trump Tower meetings with Russian agents. This is noteworthy in that it's the only of these 10 items where Mueller explicitly goes out of his way to say that none of the elements of obstruction of justice could be even construed to be present in any form, and the evidence does not establish it. Seventh, his ordering of Attorney General Jeff Sessions to unrecuse himself and take direct control of the investigation. Eighth, ordering White House Special Counsel Don McGahn to deny that the president ever attempted to fire Mueller. 9, President conduct toward Michael Flynn, his former campaign advisor Paul Manafort, and a third redacted individual during their respective trials. Because of the context of what trials we've seen come out of the Mueller investigation, it is highly likely that this third redacted individual is Robert Stone, who is a longtime advisor and friend of the president. But because that is not established in the report, it is under redaction. We're not sure of that fact. Finally, the last section deals with the president's conduct toward his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, during Michael Cohen's trials. At the end of section 2, Mueller concludes it by discussing overarching factual issues of the case. First, he acknowledges that while some of the obstruction of justices are very simple and uncomplicated, others are complicated by what is referred to as the president's Article 2 constitutional authority, which basically gives him a lot of presidential authority. That's the section that gives that authority in the Constitution. What that can tell us is that some of them he treats as simple obstruction of justice cases. Other ones he says it's not clear whether the president's authority allows him to do the things that he did. He states that even if the president was not covering up a crime, it can still be obstruction of justice, which means that even if you were to conclude from the section 1 of the report that there was no conspiracy or no other direct criminal acts, the fact that you could find him to have an obstructive act, a nexus, and corrupt intent in trying to prevent the investigation in some way, even if he's not covering up a criminal act, could still be called obstruction of justice. Finally, it notes that the discovery by Trump that he was being directly investigated changed his behavior regarding people involved in the investigation, which is a noteworthy fact in establishing that he might have had corrupt intent. This was marked by him lashing out at the investigation and those who cooperated with it on the public sphere, while privately attempting to minimize or eliminate the investigation. So that's section 2. Right now we're going to hear from Lynn and then Stephanie on interpretations of the report.
Okay, so as we know, there are different interpretations of the Mueller report. The first one is as if the report is conclusive or obstructive. So Quinta Teresic is the managing editor of Lawfare and Washington Post. She has a heat map that shows a simplification from Mueller's analysis of the evidence in relation to the 3 common elements of the obstruction statutes. So she stated that Mueller is correct in his legal analysis that a president may still obstruct justice even if the act in question is taken entirely under his Article 2 authority. Nevertheless, her map indicates interpretation on the evidence that Mueller seems to provide. She also agreed with Mueller's statutory argument that states abroad, independent, and unqualified prohibition on obstruction of justice. Rather than that, as Trump's personal counsel apparently argued to Mueller covering only acts that would impair their rectitudes and availability of evidence. Following that, let's take a brief look on her map. So the heat map is relating to obstruction of justice, which is an obstructive act, a nexus between the act and official proceeding, as Andrew has mentioned about, and corrupt intent. So as you can see, the dark pink is like substantial evidence, while the light pink show that it's like the evidence could support. The light green is like it's unclear on the evidence, and the dark green is like evidence is not established. As you can see, there are acts that are absolutely obstructive, such as the efforts to fire and curtail Mueller, the order to McMahon to deny Trump's order to fire Mueller, and the conduct to Manafort, which are E, F, and J's second line. However, there are maps and readings that differ from the map to some extent, have also been broadly published. Chau has also provided a slightly different take that's available on his Twitter. He's also a McMahon business law firm. In his map, the common elements responses are somewhat similar to Quintet's map that are replaced with only yes, no, and maybe, and the only extra element is that it's possibly charged. So it's shown that his map has the same responses with like Quintet's on these three evidence, such as the effort to fire and curtail Mueller and the conduct toward Manafort. Well, yet what might seem not analogous are the Manafort and Cohen cases. He agreed that these two cases are absolutely obstruction acts, without no doubt. So, notwithstanding, other acts also attribute an obstruction relation a lot for me, despite by the undisguised evidence to support. Now, Stephanie will definitely go on with our important interpretation.
Another interpretation of the Mueller report is that it is conclusive of both conspiracy and obstruction. Proponents of this view acknowledge that the report was not intended to accuse the president of any crime, but rather it was a record of all evidence that would be relevant to such an investigation. Still, many believe it to be self-evident that there is clear proof that Trump was conspiring with the Russians and interfered in the subsequent investigation. argue that Mueller used flawed arguments in order to stay within legal boundaries. One of the most vocal proponents of this view has been Goldsmith. Goldsmith is a lawyer and has formerly served as the Assistant Attorney General for the OLC. But in order to fully understand the reasoning behind his views, we must first go back to the presidential clear statement rule, which Andrew had previously discussed. Proponents believe that Mueller avoided this rule by considering the obstruction statutes as part of the exception. They criticize his connection between obstruction and bribery for being heavily flawed. They argue that obstruction is entirely different from bribery. But Goldsmith speculates that the report would have failed to meet legal standards had Mueller not made this weak argument. But regardless of which view they prefer, critics of the report discredit the alleged strength of the conspiracy and obstruction. And now we will go back to Andrew for a conclusion.
As Stephanie stated before, the report was not meant to accuse Trump of rigging the votes, and just to inform people of what was happening. And since there was not enough proof that Trump worked with Russia to rig the election, he was not accused of any crime. And so this report has 4 parts to it. So hopefully, the report is definitely intimidating to read. So hopefully you guys just opened your eyes to what is happening in our world today. Thank you.
What was the time?
And scene.